Good evening and welcome. You're watching Left, Right and Centre, the weekend edition. I'm Vedant Agarwal. Our lead story, well, the India-Canada diplomatic showdown continues. This as ties between the two countries have really hit rock bottom. India has hit back at Canada, and how? India says that, well, Canada is making these baseless allegations, unfounded allegations against the Home Minister, and there will be serious consequences to such allegations. In fact, India has also leveled a very sensational allegation against Canada, saying that, well, there is an attempt to snoop on Indian officials there, consular officials in Canada. There's an atmosphere of extremism in Canada in which officials are working. So serious allegations there. Remember, when it comes to diplomacy, charges of snooping and surveillance are seriously, grave allegations which will have wide-ranging ramifications. What is the road ahead as far as India-Canada ties are concerned? On Left, Right and Centre this evening, we ask, with this unprecedented escalation, what could be the serious consequences that India is talking about? Before I introduce my panel, let's listen in to what the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson had to say this evening.
We had summoned the representative of the Canadian High Commission yesterday. A diplomatic note was handed over in reference to the proceedings of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security in Ottawa on October 29th, 2024. It was conveyed in the note that the Government of India protests in the strongest terms to the absurd and baseless references made to the Union Home Minister of India before the committee by Deputy Minister David Morrison. Yes, some of our consular officials were recently informed by the Canadian government that they have been and continued to be under audio and video surveillance. Their communications have also been intercepted. We have formally protested to the Canadian government as we deem these actions to be a flagrant violation of relevant diplomatic and consular conventions.
So extremely serious allegations there. Let me introduce my panel this evening. Joining me on Left, Right and Centre tonight, Vivek Mishra, Deputy Director, Strategic Studies Programme, ORF, visiting fellow ORF America. Also Brahma Chalani, Strategic Affairs expert, is with us. Dr. Tarak Karta, former Director, National Security Council Secretariat. Also Pinak Rajan Chakrabarti, former MEA Secretary and Ambassador. Thanks all very much for being with us. Mr. Chakrabarti, let me begin by asking you, this is truly an unprecedented showdown between India and Canada, something that we've perhaps seen only vis-a-vis Pakistan, in the past decade or so. How do you see this? Because diplomatic ties have certainly hit rock bottom. There are certain differences that have become irreconcilable between the two countries.
Well, I was, in fact, in my diplomatic career, I have seen only Pakistan and Canada acting like this. And it's unfortunate that this has happened. Canada was always a friendly country. We did a lot of business with them. We have a lot of Indian community there. But this is absolutely something that I have never anticipated. And I think this has gone beyond all the red lines that India has in its relations with various countries. And I think it's also a kind of an eye-opener as to what happens. In diplomacy, we don't normally announce all these things. Whatever we do, and let's face it, I mean, diplomats are there in each other's country to gather information as per their national interest. And to say, and if Canada makes these announcements publicly, that this is what has happened, I blame so-and-so and I blame so-and-so, it's absolutely bizarre. I mean, I've never come across this kind of allegations. Now, the question in my mind is, why are they doing it? And I think in the background, there is another hand, and that is of the USA. They are acting as a proxy for the USA. And we know why. Because the USA is so unhappy with our stand vis-a-vis Russia. They are willing to cross certain lines but not directly. So they are using Canada as a catch. And this is, in my view, is the kind of a bottom line that I see it this way. I don't know, others may disagree, but I see it this way.
Because that is a very radical argument, Mr. Chakravarti, as many would say, given the fact that India-US relations perhaps have been better than ever before.
Well, I would say that look, every country in diplomacy and international politics seeks leverage, both positive and negative. And I think the US has found a way of seeking negative leverage with India. And I think this is certainly a factor that is going to impinge not just Canada, forget India-Canada relations, it's already in the gutter. But I would say that this would also affect India-US relations. But so far, I think we've been managing it. I think the US has been clever enough to keep it under wraps and have a bilateral dialogue going so that they can deal with whatever it is. And that bilateral dialogue gives them the leverage.
Yes, which is why we saw, the difference between how US and Canada approached the issue, whether it was the entire Pannu case, the way India and US have been able to negotiate. Perhaps there are a lot of back channel talks, as you're mentioning, but as far as India and Canada is concerned, it's all out in the open. And Brahma Chilani come in on this, because what India also said today about baseless allegations against the Home Minister, something India has been demanding for the past 1 year now. If Canada is making these allegations, then evidence needs to be put out in the public domain. Earlier as well, we saw various Canadian ministers talk about the willingness of the Canadian government to put out that evidence in the public domain, but so far it has not happened. Till the time evidence is put out, these allegations remain unfounded, as India has put it.
You're right. Well, in the past, countries have linked foreign agents to a domestic death. For example, in 2010, when the Dubai police chief accused Mossad of killing a Hamas commander in a Dubai hotel, countries have typically presented video, audio, or forensic evidence. They have presented that evidence in the public domain. And they have mostly avoided blaming the government that the foreign agents represent. Trudeau, by contrast, cast direct blame on the Indian government without presenting an iota of evidence. And as he recently admitted that when he made that allegation in September last year, he was relying on raw intelligence, not on hard evidence. So all this raises the question as to why Canada has triggered this downward spiral in relations with India. And of course, the domestic political factor is very much an important consideration. There's no doubt that Khalistani radicals wield real political influence in Canada, including as funders. And Jagmeet Singh, who just in September withdrew support to Trudeau's minority government, accusing Trudeau's Liberal Party of being corrupt, of trying to destroy Canada with its links to the corporate world. Now, this week, after the main Quebec party decided to join hands with the Conservatives to pull down the Trudeau government, Jagmeet Singh has again re-emerged as the kingmaker, as the savior of Trudeau. Precisely. He wants to keep the Trudeau government afloat because he's thanking Trudeau for the expulsions of Indian diplomats, for taking the tough line against India. All this means that with Jagmeet Singh now keeping the Trudeau government afloat, Trudeau has even less room to mend relations with India. In other words, until elections are held in Canada next year and a new government takes shape, unless Trudeau falls before that, we're going to have very strained relations between India and Canada. But, your reference to the US and Pannoon, if I could make a comment on that.
Yes.
Pannoon is still making terrorist threats against India from American soil without the US reining in this guy. He's been targeting specific Air India flights. Now, if you just imagine a scenario where somebody wanted by the US was based in India, somebody the US had designated as a terrorist and was operating from Indian soil and making threats against American airlines, how would Washington react? And yet, the US has basically condoned Pannoon's terrorist threats against Indian targets. And this is completely unacceptable. So I think going back to the point the question that you were raising, the fact is that it was the U.S. intelligence sharing with Canada that provoked Trudeau to take on India. And the intelligence that the U.S. provided Trudeau was sketchy intelligence. So behind Trudeau has been the Biden administration. And Canada is only one element in a broader canvas which have brought U.S.-India ties under strain. Bangladesh, the U.S. role there.
I think that's an important point. You're perhaps reiterating also what Mr. Chakravarti said about Canada sort of acting as a proxy. But Dr. Tara Karta come in on this because diplomatically speaking, Canada has really become extremely difficult to deal with because it's on the offensive. I mean, week after week. I mean, first they, talked about Indian diplomats, Indian envoys. Now, of course, making direct references to the Indian Home Minister. This is truly unprecedented. Canada is on the offensive. And India's stand has been constant that there's zero tolerance against extremism, and that's something India said today as well, that there's an atmosphere of extremism in which our diplomats are operating in Canada. I mean, we just saw a couple of weeks back how the diplomat was recalled as well, and he made those similar points. But diplomatically speaking, how do you see India dealing with the Canada challenge?
I'd just like to add to what he said earlier, just 1 second. Jagmeet Singh has also said that, the Sikh genocide needs to be recognized by Parliament. So this is going full lick. I mean, this is the way that they're going to go in future, in the immediate future. You will see more of this. I just want to differ slightly. See, if you look at how the events have unfolded from 2021 onwards, the main issues in the Canadian press was of Chinese interference.
Yes.
There was repeated calls of, there was a leak in the media. There was a Canadian national security official who wrote anonymously in the media talking of Chinese interference and saying he couldn't take it anymore, which is why he wrote. Right. Then Trudeau was forced to call upon, for a sort of in-house probe. Probe means that's secret. That is not available to the public. Side by side, there was another one, a public inquiry against Chinese interference. This was all going on till March, April, it went on.
Early this year.
It was not over the newspapers, right? In June, Nijjar was killed. After June, there is no talk of China. This is date-wise. I'm just telling you, this is what happened. China's gone off the thing and it's all about India. Of course, then you had this ridiculous report which came out recently saying that naming Indian media, X has done this, B has done this, C has done this. And by the way, Trudeau was asked that there was a leaked Chinese report, intelligence report, saying China preferred a minority conservative government. I mean, liberal government. That was a leaked intelligence report. So when they asked him, he said, no, I've never heard about it. Now you contrast what they did vis-a-vis the Chinese interference to Indian interference. Look at the difference in the way it's being handled. You see, in one, they're keeping very quiet. Trudeau said nothing. In this, he's all over the place talking about India. So this is just the facts I'm putting before you. What are we going to do about it? It is extremely serious. We can expect that this will only rise as the trial unfolds of those citizens, of those people who were caught, not citizens. As the media catches hold of more, juicy stuff on this, we are going to have to face this kind of rising escalation because that is what he wants. He wants this to escalate. He has shown no sign at all of wanting to de-escalate. That is all I'm saying.
Vivek Mishra, I think your perspective would be interesting on what all three panelists have said about some sort of a US backing or some sort of a US interference in this, given the fact that it was absolutely bizarre how Canada came out with allegation after allegation and going public with it without evidence. But diplomatically speaking, How do you see this, and particularly in the geopolitical context that we see? I mean, Dr. Tarak Karta interestingly talked about China as well, but how do you see this, in terms of the larger geopolitical context?
So, I mean, interesting points. I wouldn't,
All right, we seem to have an issue with your line there, Vivek Mishra. We'll try and fix that. Mr. Chakravarti, if you would like to answer that question, and also the road ahead, given the fact that it's not really advantageous for India to have strained diplomatic ties with a nation like Canada. I mean, it has been our ally, and it is a very sort of attractive destination for so many Indians, so many Indian students as well. So, do you see any sort of reconciliation as far as our diplomatic ties are concerned going forward? Because now, of course, it's all over the place, with India also not backing down and sort of leveling counter allegations against Canada as well.
Well, I don't think any diplomat or anyone who's been in the diplomatic service would be comfortable with this situation. We don't want bad ties with Canada. I don't think that is our goal. But if Canada behaves, in a rogue manner, and in a sense, Canada is now the second largest host of terrorists from India, next to Pakistan, of course, which is a very well-known factor. Then what do you think India should be doing? And we have been pleading with them and approaching them, saying that please put an end to this. But they think that they hide under the freedom of speech, etc. And it's okay if they can do this thing, they do it domestically, etc. But they seem to forget that gangs there are financing killings in India. But they think it's all okay. I mean, this is all part of their democracy. And today we have reached the end of the tether, because for 40, 50, remember the Kanishka bombing? What they did?
Yes.
They dodged it.
Absolutely.
They couldn't convict anyone. They caught a few people, but then they were all out. And they are still active.
I think that's an important point, because India's stand has remained constant in that sense. India has said time and again that there's zero tolerance towards extremism of any kind. Vivek Mishra is back with us. Yes, Vivek Mishra, go ahead. I had to interrupt you there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the US question is pretty interesting from an India's perspective. The saga started by US sharing the intelligence and pushing the envelope on Canada. But I think, to my mind, it's really baffling that it's diplomatically so naive for Justin Trudeau to take that evidence and scale it up as he has. Clearly, as the other panelists have pointed out, that he's really on the verge with all the domestic political support, etc. As you saw recently, the Diwali celebrations was cancelled by the Conservative Party, which many people believe in India is better for India, so to say, and they are almost double in terms of polls next year, so they're likely to win. But see how the nuts and the bolts are sort of coming together in both the parties. There are three particular MPs in the Conservative Party who are now being seen as the prime suspects of who sort of enabled this cancellation or enforced this cancellation of Diwali celebration. And within the Hindu communities group of WhatsApp groups, they're doing the rounds that let's make sure that these three MPs are not elected, and rightly so. So I think, to think that this has now become bipartisan in many ways, or is threatening to become bipartisan, the anti-India sentiments. So it's really bad for India-Canada relations. I think an off-ramp from here is very difficult, given that the Trudeau administration has really taken it to another level and his steps and diplomacy doesn't suggest that he's going to scale down. Now, India, interestingly, has suggested that it's going to take it going to respond and retaliate in commensurate measure. And I think it's in many of these, if you go through the Vienna Convention, for example, the snooping bit could really be taken to court.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point you're making. And Brahma Chilani come in on this because we're talking about certain red lines in diplomacy which have been crossed in this dynamic, certainly by Canada. I mean, when it comes to diplomacy, the snooping allegation is a big allegation. But as Mr. Chakravarti also mentioned at the outset, that all governments collect intelligence, and that is part of diplomacy. But to go public with it and to say that, you know, Indian consular officials were under audio-video surveillance is an extremely grave allegation. I mean, it's an extremely grave sort of aspect to look at when we talk of India-Canada ties.
You're right, but I think let's look at the bigger picture. And we should not forget that this is not a new problem, but an old problem.
Of course.
For example, under Trudeau's father, the then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, Canada's reluctance to rein in or extradite Khalistan extremists wanted in India for terrorism led to the 1985 twin bombings targeting Air India flights. In a way, history is repeating itself. History is repeating itself in part because of India's failure, the failure of successive Indian governments to exert sustained pressure on Canada. We let Canada off the hook even over the Kanishka bombing. Canada took 21 years to set up a commission of inquiry. The mastermind of that bombing, according to Canadian inquiries, Talvinder Parmar, was not brought to justice by Canada. He was killed by Indian police when he sneaked in from Pakistan. And even today, why are we talking about Canada now? Why did we not wake up earlier? For example, we ignored all the diplomatic cables from our missions in Canada about how Justin Trudeau was coddling Khalistan terrorists. We woke up only after Justin Trudeau got up in Parliament in September last year and leveled that allegation against India.
Sure.
We have to realize that we need to exert sustained pressure on Canada. Canada has become the global hub of Khalistanis. There is a link now between Khalistan militancy, drug trade, and gangland killings in Canada's British Columbia. And we need to force Canada to wake up to the threat posed by Khalistan militants. They pose an international security threat, and it's incumbent on India to exert pressure on a sustained basis.
I think that's an important point. Dr. Tarak Karta, the last word to you. Would you agree with Brahma Chilani when he says that India was perhaps caught off guard when it comes to Canada? And also going forward, what do you see the sort of larger ramifications of this as far as India's global standing is concerned also?
See, I just want to differ a little bit on the US charge. You know, the US may have shared intelligence with Canada. I mean, it did share intelligence with Canada. Yeah. But which is, I mean, normal between two allies, right? It's not unusual. The point is how each handled it. The US has handled it in a very legal, proper manner with the case and everything shared, and it's proceeding. Trudeau chose to go public. That is why I was making that point about China, that huge thing about him, you know, the Chinese influence on the elections, which he won.
Yes.
That got deflected completely with after June. That's the point I was making. See, in 2020, the Trudeau had also, answering your question, he had talked about the farmers' agitations and things, you know, he tried to interfere in that. And Delhi was extremely annoyed with that. So there was a lot of, you know, talk, up and down talk on that and stuff. Right now, what is happening is they've had at least 2 major operations against drug trafficking between US and Canada in one operation, and one I think was yesterday. One massive lab was caught. So I think it's finally dawned on the Canadian intelligence that there is a strong drug factor, there is a strong criminal factor in the things that we've been saying all along.
Funds, as we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. And I know for a fact that we've shared this intelligence with them, that there is a huge organized crime racket going on. And I mean, how can you not act on it? Now they've started doing that. So that could be a possible off-ramp. But like I said, I don't think Trudeau is going to bring down the rhetoric.
Absolutely.
This serves his...
He's not going to bring down the rhetoric. I think that's a very important point you're making, because Canada has been on the offensive in the past 1 month particularly, but India also giving it back. And how? Thanks all very much for being with us on the show this evening. India-Canada ties hitting rock bottom. But of course, as India has said in multiple statements that Justin Trudeau is hostile to India and he is running an anti-India campaign for domestic political gains. That's all the time that we have on Left, Right and Centre this evening. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.